The gallery was quiet in the way only expensive places could be. That particular hush that money bought, the kind that made every footstep feel like an intrusion. Nadia Harmon stood near the entrance to the Meridian Architecture Gala, her champagne untouched, her eyes fixed on the far end of the room where her husband was laughing. She had not seen him laugh like that in a very long time. His name was Patrick Whitford, and he was laughing at something the woman beside him had said. The woman's name was Simone. Nadia had learned that 3 months ago, from a credit card statement she wasn't supposed to find. Simone Vreeland, 29 years old, junior associate at Patrick's firm. The kind of woman who wore white to other people's events and somehow made it look deliberate. Nadia set her champagne glass down on the nearest surface and watched them without moving. She had been married to Patrick Whitford for 11 years. She had drafted the initial proposals for 9 of the 12 projects that had made his firm what it was today. She had written the structural narratives that landed the Heron Tower Commission, the ones that convinced the Vancouver Development Board to approve the West Side Cultural Center. She had done this while managing a household, while raising 2 children, while attending every single firm dinner and client reception with the right dress and the right smile, and not once complaining that her name appeared in none of the presentations. She had also done this while being 4 months pregnant with their 3rd child, a fact she had told him about 6 weeks ago, and which he had responded to by asking her, very calmly, whether she had thought about all the options. She had not answered him. She had gone upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed, and understood for the first time that she had been disappearing. So slowly she hadn't noticed until there was almost nothing left. Patrick still hadn't looked up and seen her. She almost turned around and left. She had told herself she would come tonight, only to collect her portfolio from the firm's display booth. 14 months of work on the Clearwater Heritage Restoration Project. Her designs, her research, her drawings. She had filed the IP registration 2 weeks ago, alone, sitting at the kitchen table at midnight while Patrick was at a working dinner. She had not told him. She wasn't sure why she'd done it at the time. Some instinct. The kind that comes when the body knows something the mind hasn't admitted yet. She was reaching for her portfolio case when she heard someone say her name. Nadia Harmon. She turned. The man standing beside her was tall, with the kind of measured stillness that came from authority rather than effort. He was perhaps 50, silver at his temples, with a direct way of looking at people that was not aggressive, but was completely without performance. "I'm sorry," she said. "Have we met?" "Not formally. My name is Raymond Achaby. I'm the principal partner at Achaby Capital Group." He extended his hand, and she shook it automatically, her mind cycling through what she knew of Achaby Capital, one of the most significant private development funds in the country. The Burnaby Waterfront Project. The Manitoba Civic Renewal Initiative. Raymond Achaby had been on the cover of Canadian Architect magazine 18 months ago. She had read the profile twice. "I've been following the Clearwater restoration documentation," he said. "The approach to structural authenticity without compromising accessibility, it's not something I've seen done at that level before. I understand the design is yours." Nadia blinked. "Yes. I wanted to introduce myself," he said, "because we're beginning a project in Halifax that requires exactly that kind of thinking. I was hoping we might speak sometime this week, if you're open to it." She was quiet for a moment. Behind Raymond, across the room, Patrick had finally looked up. She saw the exact moment he registered her. She watched his expression move through surprise, then something complicated, then land somewhere that looked very much like calculation. The woman beside him, Simone, had not yet noticed. "I'd be very open to it," Nadia said, and she turned back to Raymond Achaby and smiled. And it was the first smile that had felt real to her in months. She had grown up in Scarborough, the eldest daughter of a woman who had come from Ghana with a nursing degree, and a determination that Nadia had spent her entire childhood trying to understand, and her entire adulthood trying to live up to. Her mother, Abena, had worked double shifts and still managed to read to Nadia every night. When Nadia told her at 17 that she wanted to study architecture, Abena had said, simply, "Then study it properly," and had worked extra months to afford the portfolio course. Nadia had won a scholarship to Dalhousie. She had graduated first in her cohort. She had been recruited by 3 firms before she met Patrick Whitford at a conference in Ottawa. where he had spent 45 minutes talking to her about load-bearing poetry. His phrase, not hers, and she had found it so genuinely interesting that she had given him her card without thinking twice. They had dated for 2 years, married at 30. She had joined his firm not because he had asked her to, but because the projects were good, and the work was real, and she had told herself that the fact that her contributions rarely appeared under her name was a bureaucratic issue, a temporary thing, something they would sort out when the firm was more established. The firm had become very established. Her name still hadn't appeared. She had stopped bringing it up around the time their second child, Marcus, was born. There had been too much to manage, and Patrick had a way of making her feel, in the gentlest possible terms, that raising these concerns was slightly unreasonable, that they were partners, that what benefited the firm benefited both of them, that she was being very corporate about something that was meant to be a marriage. She had believed him, or she had wanted to, which she was now understanding were two different things. She did not go home immediately after the gala. She sat in her car in the parkade for 20 minutes, watching rain track sideways across the windshield, thinking about Raymond Atcheby's card in her coat pocket, and the way Patrick had looked at her from across the room. Her phone buzzed. "Patrick, where did you go? We should talk." She put the phone face down on the passenger seat and drove home. He arrived 40 minutes later. She was in the kitchen, making tea she didn't want, because she needed something to do with her hands. "You didn't tell me you were going tonight," he said. "I went to get my portfolio. You were talking to Raymond Atcheby." She turned around. Yes. Patrick moved to the other side of the island. He had a way of positioning himself in conversations, always slightly advantaged, always with a clear exit. She had stopped noticing it until recently, and now she couldn't stop noticing it. "He's a serious player," Patrick said, in the tone he used when he was deciding how to handle something. "You know, if he's reaching out about a project, that's a conversation the firm should be part of." Nadia looked at him for a long moment. "He reached out to me, specifically." "Nadia, you've been on leave." "I'm not on leave. I've never been on leave. I've been working from home while also managing every single thing in this house." She said it without raising her voice, and that was what stopped him more than anything. She had always been the one to absorb, to soften. He wasn't used to her voice being this even. "The Clearwater project," she continued. "The IP registration went through 2 weeks ago." Silence. "My name," she said, "my design, my research." Patrick set his keys down on the counter. She watched him realize in real time what that meant. The Clearwater restoration had been the centerpiece of the firm's submission for the Heritage Development Fund, a federal grant worth nearly $4 million. He had been planning to use it as the anchor of the firm's portfolio for the next 3 years. "You registered the IP," he said slowly. "I did when?" "Before I knew about Simone, and after. The timing doesn't really change what it is." She had not planned to say her name. It came out the way things did when you had been holding them too long. Not explosive, just finally out of the container. Patrick said nothing for a moment. "Then?" "That was private." "Yes," Nadia said. "It was. She met with Raymond Atcheby that Thursday at his offices in downtown Toronto. The meeting was supposed to last an hour. It lasted 3. The Halifax project was a waterfront adaptive reuse, a collection of 19th-century warehouse structures that the city wanted to convert into a mixed-use cultural and residential space without erasing their industrial character. It was the kind of project Nadia had been thinking about for years, the kind of structural and historical problem that required the specific sensibilities she had developed over a decade of doing exactly this kind of work, mostly for other people's credit. Raymond Atcheby was direct in the way that people who had nothing to prove usually were. He asked clear questions. He listened to the answers. He did not interrupt her. When she described her approach to the Clearwater methodology, he leaned forward slightly and said, "That's exactly the problem we've been trying to articulate. The language isn't mine, it's yours." She drove home that afternoon, feeling something she hadn't felt in so long she'd forgotten the word for it. Not happy, exactly. Something older than happy. The feeling of being seen accurately. Patrick called twice while she was driving. She didn't answer. He was waiting when she got home. He'd sent the kids to his parents. She could tell by the quiet in the house and the particular way he was standing in the hallway, which meant he had prepared something. I want to talk about the IP filing, he said. I know you do. There are firm interests attached to that project, Nadia. You know that. Whatever is happening between us personally, that's a professional matter. It's my professional work, she said. She kept her coat on. She hadn't decided to, but it turned out her body had. The firm invested in the research. I have every email, every draft, every revision request. She had been very organized always. It was, she thought now, one of the many things she had done correctly without being sure why. I have the original proposal documents with my metadata. I have the client correspondence. If there's a dispute about ownership, I'm comfortable letting a judge look at the documentation. He looked at her the way people look when they realize the ground has shifted and they don't know when it happened. I'm not trying to fight you, she said. And she meant it. I'm trying to make sure that what is mine is mine. That's all I've ever wanted. The separation was not dramatic in the end. There was no single terrible evening. There were lawyers, and there were a great number of documents, and there were a great number of documents, and there were difficult conversations at the kitchen table about the children and the mortgage and the structure of things going forward. Patrick was not a villain in the conventional sense. He was a man who had taken and taken and taken, without ever framing it to himself as taking, and that specific kind of damage was very hard to argue about, because there was no clear moment of malice to point to, just a long, slow erasure that he had probably genuinely not noticed. She let him think that for a while. She wasn't sure it mattered whether he understood or not. What she did not let him have was the Clearwater work. That was hers. And it was registered, and the legal position was straightforward. The firm could use the project in their portfolio with her credit attached, or not at all. He chose not to, for a while. Then the Heritage Development Fund announcement came out, and Achebe Capital was listed as the project lead. And Nadia's name was in the third sentence of the press release. And Patrick's firm was mentioned nowhere. She found out he'd seen it from their daughter, Yemi, who was 12 and had Googled her mother's name for a school project and found 6 articles. The Halifax project opened in the spring of the following year. Nadia flew out for the opening with Yemi and Marcus, who were old enough to understand something was happening, even if they couldn't have named exactly what. She wore a dark green coat that Yemi had helped her choose. Marcus held her hand in the taxi from the hotel, not because he was nervous, but because that was who he was. The building was extraordinary. She knew it would be. She had built it that way. But seeing it finished still struck her somewhere she hadn't expected, somewhere under the professional satisfaction, somewhere more personal. Raymond Achebe stood beside her at the opening and said, very quietly, so only she could hear, "This is what it's supposed to look like when someone is actually given the space to do their work." She didn't answer immediately. She was looking at the light coming through the restored industrial windows, the way it moved across the original brick, the way the new structure held the old one without overwriting it. She had thought about that balance for a very long time. How to preserve something that had been worth preserving all along. How to make space for the old bones of a thing without pretending they hadn't been there. "Thank you," she said eventually. "Don't thank me," he said. "This was always yours. We just gave you room." She heard about Patrick and Simone in stages. The way these things tended to come out. A mutual acquaintance here, a mention from someone at the kids' school there. Simone had moved into the house in Leaside. Patrick had taken on a series of smaller commissions. The firm had restructured. Nadia didn't think about it much. She was busy. She had 2 more projects with Achebe Capital in the pipeline. She had been asked to join the advisory board of a National Heritage Foundation. She had started teaching one evening seminar at the University of Toronto, more because she liked it than because she needed to. Yemi was applying to high schools. Marcus had joined the school's robotics club and was aggressively boring her with the details which she loved. She had also started keeping money of her own, clearly, in accounts with her name alone on them. She had started doing that quietly, before the separation, before she could even fully articulate why. She told her sister Joanna about it one afternoon over coffee, and Joanna had looked at her and said, "You always were the organized one," and then had paused and said, more gently, "I'm glad you did that." "I didn't even know I was protecting myself," Nadia said. "I thought I was just being careful." "Maybe those are the same thing," Joanna said. There was a moment, about a year after the Halifax opening, that she thought about sometimes. She had been at a conference in Vancouver, Urban Heritage Development, the kind of event she now attended as a speaker rather than a spouse, and she had walked into the hotel lobby after her panel and nearly run directly into Patrick. He had been standing near the entrance with a client, looking slightly diminished in the way she had seen happen to people whose confidence had always depended on borrowed context. He was still handsome, still well-dressed. He still had the same way of straightening slightly. When he saw her, the old reflex. Simone was not with him. Nadia didn't know why she noticed that. "Nadia," he said. His voice was careful. "Patrick," she kept moving. Not rudely. She smiled even, the small professional smile that cost her nothing. But she kept moving, because she had a dinner with Raymond and 3 civic architects from Montreal, and she was no longer in the habit of rearranging herself for the convenience of people who had never arranged themselves for her. She heard him say something behind her. She didn't catch the words. She didn't turn around. She went to her dinner. The conversation was good, specific and serious, and full of the kind of problem-solving she had always found genuinely interesting. The food was excellent. She ordered the thing she actually wanted, rather than the thing that seemed appropriate. Walking back to her room later, crossing the quiet lobby with the city lights visible through the long windows, she tried to find the feeling she had expected to feel in a moment like that. Some residue of grief or bitterness or triumph. Something that announced itself. She found instead something much quieter. The particular sensation of being exactly where she was supposed to be, in her own life, which she had built on her own terms, starting from the moment she had chosen not to disappear completely. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. She had learned, finally, that the most powerful thing she'd ever done was simply to stop making herself smaller to fit a space someone else had decided was hers. Her name was Nadia O.C. Harmon. She was 41 years old, and the work bore her name, and she was going to sleep very well tonight.